So Lynn, I'm recording. Oops. Yeah. Recording. If we get some other people as we continue. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this evening's program with Benyamin, excuse me, I got it. Cohen, author of The Einstein Effect. I'm Meg Scher, the director of the DM Hunt Library. A little bit about our presenter this evening. Benyamin Cohen manages the official social media accounts of Albert Einstein. He's the news director of The Forward and was the founding editor of both Jews Week and American Jewish Life magazine. He is the co-host of That Jewish News Show podcast. He's also the author of My Jesus Year, A Rabbi's Son Wanders the Bible Belt in Search of His Own Faith. Look at that. Which was named one of the best books of the year by Publishers Weekly and for which he received the Georgia Author of the Year award. He is based in Morgantown, West Virginia, where he lives with his wife, 3 dogs, and a flock of chickens known as the Cohens. That's my favorite part of the bio. For more, please visit benyamincohen.com. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. Thanks for being here. The Hunt Library provides a variety of free programming to our community, both virtually and in person. If you'd like to support our work, I will put the link to donate in the chat, and we would appreciate that. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. I am in the middle of a book tour right now, and tonight I'm actually staying at my childhood best friend's house in Philadelphia, and so I'm using his home office. So this is not my home office. He's a law professor at Villanova, so this is his office. So if you like it, I'll tell him. If you don't like it, I won't tell him. Thank you so much for coming, and I know there's so much going on in the world with world events right now, elections and wars, and I think I'm happy we could all gather tonight and just, for an hour, enjoy ourselves and, put everything that's happening outside in the world, put it on the back burner just for an hour and enjoy talking about my favorite genius, Albert Einstein. And so tonight I'm going to talk about 2 parts of Albert Einstein. I'm going to talk about Einstein's head and Einstein's heart. Einstein's head and Einstein's heart. And I should start off by saying I'm the last person who should be writing a book about Albert Einstein. I am not a scientist. As a matter of fact, I failed science in high school. So if there's any physicists in the audience, you might know more about Einstein than I do. I knew as much about Einstein as the average Joe. He won the Nobel Prize, E equals MC squared, whatever that means, and the wild shock of white hair that looks like he just put his finger in an electrical socket. That's really all I knew about Albert Einstein. Until I learned a story, I heard a story about him, and it really sparked my interest, or you could even say my obsession in Albert Einstein. And so I'm going to start off tonight by telling you that story. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. We'll see if this works here because I have some slides I could show you. We'll see if technology is on our side tonight. Oh, hold on. I just got a new laptop and it's asking me. 1 second. Oh no. It may have me leave the Zoom for a second, but we'll be right back in 10 seconds. Okay, I'm back. Back to our regularly scheduled. It says host disabled. You're gonna have to make me the host again. Sorry. And then I promise it'll be worth it. Okay, so now I should be able to share. Yes, now it's working. Now it is working. Here we go. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yep. By the way, this is my chicken, Albert Einstein, on the left there. You can see why I call him Albert Einstein. but he's actually a rooster. That's Albert. So the story starts on the day Albert Einstein dies. I'm going to tell you who this guy is in a minute. Albert Einstein dies on April 18th, 1955 in Princeton Hospital. And in the morning, they call, Einstein died in the middle of the night, and in the morning, they called the pathologist to come in and to perform an autopsy. This is the pathologist who came in that day, Dr. Thomas Harvey. And he comes and performs the autopsy on Albert Einstein. And when he is done, when nobody is looking, he cracks open Einstein's skull, reaches inside, and steals Albert Einstein's brain. This is a true story. He stole Albert Einstein's brain. You can still see his face, right? Okay, so I'll make sure I'm not moving it on my screen here. I like to call it the greatest heist of the 20th century, right? And nobody even knows about it because this guy did it in secret. He stole Albert Einstein's brain. And I should say, here he is giving a press conference outside the hospital. Everyone was interviewing him about the autopsy, and he did not mention that he stole the brain. Anyway, he took the brain not because he was a crazy guy, because he wanted to research Albert Einstein's brain, right? Einstein, as we all know, was one of the greatest minds in all of history, one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. And here he was standing just just inches away from Albert Einstein's brain. He thought it would be a waste to not take the brain and study it to see if we can understand what makes someone a genius, what makes someone so smart. And so that's why he took the brain to do research on it. Now, the rest of Albert Einstein, Einstein wanted to be cremated. He didn't want, Einstein was a very humble guy, as we'll talk about tonight. He did not want his gravesite to become like a celebrity attraction. And so he wanted to be cremated, and he was. His ashes were tossed over the Delaware River, except for the brain. The brain was not cremated because this guy took it home with him. And so he brought it home in a mason jar. And he brought it home and put it on the mantle above the fireplace in the living room. And so that's where Einstein's brain resided for many years, until one day the doctor's wife came in the house and said, "Honey, could you move Albert Einstein's brain out of the living room? It's kind of gross." And so, being a good husband, he took the brain, put it in a beer cooler, and moved it into the basement of his house in Princeton. And that is where Albert Einstein's brain resided for decades, lost to history in this guy's basement. And the problem is, he is not a brain researcher. He is a pathologist. He performs autopsies for a living. He didn't know the first thing about how to research Albert Einstein's brain. So what he would do is he was looking for brain researchers to help him. And this is the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s. This is the era before the internet. So he couldn't just Google brain researchers and find people to send to study the brain. So anytime he saw like a local yellow pages, he would flip through the yellow pages and he would look up brain scientists at different universities. And when he would find one, he would cut a small piece of the brain, like the size of like maybe like a small cookie. He would cut a piece of the brain, put it in a manila envelope, and mail it to the brain researcher unsolicited. I can only imagine these professors get to their campus, get to the office, and they get the mail, and there's a smelly manila envelope, and they open it up, and there's a piece of Albert Einstein's brain with a note attached that says, "Please do some research on it." So there are pieces of Albert Einstein's brain all over the globe, in Japan, in Honolulu, in Buenos Aires. There are so many pieces of Albert Einstein's brain all over. As a matter of fact, you can actually see a piece of Albert Einstein's brain in Philadelphia, actually where I am tonight. One of the brain researchers who got a piece was a woman, a doctor in Philadelphia. And when she retired, she donated her piece of the brain to the Mutter Museum in downtown Philadelphia. So today, if you go to the Mutter Museum, they have an exhibit where you can actually see a small piece of Albert Einstein's brain. He once put a few pieces in a mayonnaise jar and sent them to a professor in Alabama, and they got lost in the mail. And so ever since then, he started using Federal Express so he can keep track, with the tracking number where it was. And, when I heard this story, I thought to myself, wow, this is an amazing story, right? And many of you are looking at me right now, like I can tell it's the first time you're hearing this story. And I thought to myself, this is an amazing story about Albert Einstein. And not one teacher I had growing up told us this story, right? We all, like I said at the beginning, we all learned the basic contours of Albert Einstein's life, but no one ever shared this amazing story about Albert Einstein. And so I thought to myself, um, what else is there about Albert Einstein? Now, again, I want to learn so much about Albert Einstein. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm sure there's lots of stuff about physics that I don't know. I don't know about black holes and gravitational waves and quantum mechanics. But I wanted to see if I could find more interesting, stories about Albert Einstein that would be relevant to the average Joe. And I like to call myself a likable idiot. Like that, that's the kind of stories I want to find. And so I decided I wanted to, that's what I set out to do is on this journey, is to find out all these quirky, bizarre, interesting stories about Albert Einstein. So I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist my entire career. I now work for The Forward, which is America's oldest Jewish newspaper. It's been around since 1897. We covered everything, like we covered the sinking of the Titanic. That's how old this newspaper is. And we actually interviewed, in the early days, we interviewed Albert Einstein several times. We actually interviewed Albert Einstein's mother. And now keep in mind, this was a Yiddish newspaper when it first started. And the Einstein spoke Yiddish. And The Forward, that we asked Albert Einstein's mother, did you think your son would grow up to be such a great man? And she said, I thought my son would be gornished. Gornished is the Yiddish word for zilch or nothing. So it's hard to impress your mom, right? Even Albert Einstein couldn't impress his mom. And so I asked, we have an archivist at the Forward newspaper, and I asked her if she could dig up this article where it says that Albert Einstein was, about his mom. And she did. And it must have been a slow news day because it was the front page article with a big headline in Yiddish. I think I have a copy of it here. If you can see it, you can see that, right? Yeah. I don't know if you read Yiddish, but the headline says basically Albert Einstein's mother thinks he's zilch. So we in the world of journalism, we have different kinds of reporters. You have politics reporters, you have sports reporters. I decided I wanted to become the Albert Einstein reporter. And so every day I would Google Albert Einstein to see if he was in the news. I figured he wouldn't be in the news. I figured maybe once or twice a month I'd find a story about Albert Einstein. But to my surprise, to my pleasant surprise, I would find about, I don't know, 10 stories a day that were related to Albert Einstein. And so a lot of it was science articles. So there are a lot of modern day scientists, physicists who are working to further Einstein's theories. So he's very relevant in the scientific community. As a matter of fact, since the year 2000, so in the last 24 years, 5 of the Nobel Prizes in physics have been awarded to scientists working on Einstein's theories. So he's still very, very relevant to the scientific community. And so every day I would read about people who were doing experiments related to Albert Einstein. This week we had a solar eclipse. There's a story, you can Google it after our event tonight. Einstein had the theory of relativity, but it wasn't proven. And without getting into all the details, he needed a photograph of an eclipse to prove his theory of relativity. And it happened in May 1919. There was a big solar eclipse. It lasted 6.5 minutes. And that proved the theory of relativity. And Einstein held a big press conference, and nobody knew what was about to happen. They didn't know. And the New York Times sent their golf reporter to the press conference, and they reported the news. It was the front page the next day, Albert Einstein theory of relativity, and he became famous overnight. So anyway, so I find every day these science articles related to Einstein. But then I also started to find bizarre, quirky stories about Albert Einstein in the news. So for example, there is a big memorabilia market for Einstein. A lot of people want to own something that once belonged to Albert Einstein. So Einstein famously smoked a pipe. There's a lot of photographs of Einstein smoking a pipe. A few years ago, that pipe went up for auction for $1 million, right? Einstein famously wore a leather Levi's jacket. Here, if you can see on the screen, here's a picture of him. He used to love wearing this leather Levi's jacket. It's so funny. He's this, German schlubby Jewish scientist trying to look like an cool all-American James Dean, wearing this jacket. But he wore it all the time. And a few years ago, this exact jacket went up for auction. And you know who bought it? The Levi's company bought it so they can put it in the Levi's museum. And so when the curator of the Levi's museum, you can see a picture, when she opened up the box, she said it still smelled from all the tobacco smoke. All these years later, 60, 70 years later, it still smelled from all the tobacco smoke from Einstein. So I started meeting all of these weird people who were obsessed with Einstein. And I write about that in my book, which you can check out from the library. And I met a guy in Connecticut. This is a crazy guy. I have a chapter about him in my book. He lives in Connecticut, and he has the Guinness World Record for the largest collection of celebrity hair. So he claims, for example, to have bloody hair from the night Abe Lincoln was shot. Yes, he has a little bit of hair from Abe Lincoln, he says. He does have some of Neil Armstrong's hair, astronaut Neil Armstrong, that he bought off of Neil Armstrong's barber. So he has that. Neil Armstrong was very upset when he heard that news. And then when I went to visit him at his home in Connecticut, he holds up a Ziploc bag, and inside the bag was some white hair. And he says, "This is Albert Einstein's hair." Again, I don't know how you would test to see if it's really Einstein's hair. I was in Princeton this morning, and I went to the Princeton Historical Society, and they have a lot of stuff that was in Einstein's house. They have all of Einstein's furniture there. And she told me they have a brush, and that the brush actually has hair in it, but they don't know if it's Einstein's hair because Einstein lived with his wife and his stepdaughter, so it could have been somebody else's hair. But anyway, so I started writing all of these interesting articles about Albert Einstein, and one day I get a call from the Albert Einstein Archives. And I was a little worried because the Albert Einstein Archives is run by a bunch of academics and scientists who are doing real serious work to keep Einstein's memory alive, and to help physicists who want to look at Einstein's papers and study these papers, or if there's a historian who's writing a book about Einstein, they have all these documents there. And so it's a very serious, people, academics, scientists, and they called me up, and I was like, uh-oh, maybe they don't want me writing about the guy who stole Einstein's brain. I don't know why they were calling me. And they said to me something very funny, very interesting. So, social media launched, I don't know, what's it been now, 15 years, 20 years, right? When Facebook launched, when Twitter launched, when Instagram launched. And when those websites launched, they reserved pages for dead celebrities. So, for example, there is an official Elvis Presley page on Facebook. And they didn't want anybody just grabbing that page, some Joe Schmo in his basement, pretending to be Elvis Presley on Facebook. So they reserved these pages for dead celebrities, and they gave them to the estate. So they gave it to the Elvis Presley estate so that they could use it to promote Elvis Presley stuff or whatever, however they wanted to use it. So they gave Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they gave the official Albert Einstein pages to the Albert Einstein estate. But they weren't using them because, as I said, they're all a bunch of academics and scientists. They're not really into social media. So they called me up and they said, "Hey, we've been reading all your articles. You seem to know a lot of fun facts about Albert Einstein. Do you want to run and manage the official social media pages for Albert Einstein?" I was like, of course, that would be like a fun side job. And so since 2017, I am Albert Einstein online. And Einstein has 20 million fans on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Einstein has more Facebook fans than Tom Hanks, okay? And he is by far the most active dead celebrity on social media. I mean, John Wayne is on Twitter, but he really doesn't have much to say. Marilyn Monroe occasionally offers some fashion advice. But again, like I said, Einstein, and because now that I run the Einstein account, it's a very active account. So I post, get this, I post to Einstein's pages about 8 times a day. That's how much I post to Albert Einstein. So when I say he's the most active dead celebrity, I mean that. And so a lot of what I share on social media for Einstein is some of the stuff we've been discussing, the science articles, the quirky articles. I have some regular features. So for example, we all know Einstein is famous for his quotations. And so every Wednesday, I do something called Wednesday Wisdom, and I share an inspirational Einstein quote. Oh, I think I have a slide for this I was going to show you. So you see down here, the bottom middle was an Einstein quote that I shared recently. The Einstein Archives has hundreds of photographs of Albert Einstein, many of which have never been seen before. And so every Thursday, I do something called Throwback Thursday, like I did today, where I share an old photograph of Einstein. The top one middle is a photo, actually. I don't know if you've ever seen this photo. The top middle is Einstein on top of Rockefeller Center. The bottom left is Einstein at the White House. So you see there's lots of interesting photos here. And also, some of these 20 million fans send me artwork that they made of Albert Einstein, paintings and drawings and things like that. And so every Friday, I do a feature called Fan Art Friday, where I choose one of these pieces of artwork and I share it. And so that's what you're looking at the top right there. That's one of the, it's a beautiful piece of art that somebody made of Albert Einstein. And, you know, a funny thing is, I sometimes get emails from people, but I get emails from teenagers in India who are asking me for help with their science homework, right? And little do they know, you know, some short Jewish guy in West Virginia is pretending to be a Nobel Prize winner. So, you know, it is certainly the most bizarre job I've ever had. So the question is, why does Albert Einstein have 20 million fans, right? Why is he so famous, right? Shakespeare doesn't have 20 million fans on social media. Thomas Edison doesn't have 20 million fans. Why does Einstein, why is he so beloved that he has, in 2024, that he has so many fans? But we could talk about that for hours. There's probably books written just about that. Well, I'll talk tonight just for a few minutes about why I think he is so beloved. First of all, you have to realize, you have to remember, Einstein came about in an era when all of modern media was in place already. You had photographs, radio, newspapers, magazines, even television was around in Einstein's era. And he really played into it. He had that grandfatherly look, you know, and he loved talking to reporters. I don't know how many of you saw Oppenheimer last summer, right? The Oppenheimer movie. So Oppenheimer was a colleague of Einstein's. They were friends. Einstein was in the movie. And Oppenheimer was a very serious guy, right? Suit and tie, always wearing a hat, very serious guy. Albert Einstein was the exact opposite. Einstein didn't like to get dressed up. There are stories, he used to walk around Princeton in his pajamas and you know, in his bathrobe. And kids, he was very approachable. Einstein was very approachable. Kids would walk up to him and tug at his bathrobe and say, "Dr. Einstein, can you help me with my homework?" And he would stop and sit on the sidewalk and help these kids with their homework. And so that endeared him to so many people because, you know, nowadays, like we think of like, you know, a celebrity, like Oprah, I don't know. And like, oh, nobody ever gets to meet Oprah, but like everybody could meet Einstein. He was a very tangible celebrity. And he was, in his time, the most famous person, one of the most famous people on the planet. He had won the Nobel Prize and he moved to America. He was a very famous guy. He became friends with Charlie Chaplin. And there's a great story. Charlie Chaplin invited Einstein to a Hollywood red carpet premiere. It was one of Chaplin's movies. And they show up on the red carpet, and none of the journalists want to interview Chaplin. They're just interested in interviewing Einstein. And, you know, they couldn't even understand. He had this like thick German accent. There's another great story. Einstein and his wife Elsa visited Japan in January 1923. They check into their hotel. They walk onto the balcony and they look down at the street below, and there's tens of thousands of people just looking up at the balcony to get a glimpse of Albert Einstein, like he's the Beatles or some rock star or something. You know, anytime Albert Einstein would write a new scientific paper, Macy's would put a copy of it in the Macy's in Manhattan would put a copy in the window display, like it was, you know, like the birth of a royal baby announcement or something. And you know, Einstein really had a love-hate relationship with celebrity, but he knew what would make, like, he would be chased by the paparazzi all the time. And he always knew what would make for a cute photograph for the next day's paper. And there's a lot of photographs of Einstein taking his hat and tossing it in the air. And they would snap a picture because it was like a funny picture of him throwing his hat in the air. Marie Curie never took her hat and threw it in the air, right? There's no photos of Marie Curie during that. So, one of the things I like to share with Einstein's 20 million fans is to show them how Einstein's fingerprints can be found in our everyday lives, right? There's actually a lot of technology that we use on a regular basis, on a daily basis, that comes courtesy of Albert Einstein. So, for example, if I say Alexander Graham Bell, you would say the telephone, right? We picture the inventor and the invention. Alexander Graham Bell, telephone. But when you think of Albert Einstein, we don't often think of like a tangible invention that he invented, but I'm going to explain a few things that he helped with. My favorite example of this is GPS, the global positioning system, right? We all use GPS to get from point A to point B. When we're in our car, GPS gives us directions, turn here, turn there. The way GPS works, it wouldn't work unless we had the theory of relativity. And I'll just give you the Einstein for Dummies explanation of what I mean. The way GPS works is I'm going to move back so you can see. The way GPS works is you have a satellite in space, and the satellite in space is moving around in space, right? It's not stationary. It's kind of floating in space. And then we're on planet Earth, and Earth is constantly spinning, right? Earth is not stationary either. And you're in your car driving, okay? So we have three things that are in motion. The satellite's moving, Earth is moving, and your car is moving. And so Einstein's theory of relativity was an elegant mathematical equation that made all three of those points communicate and work with each other. So without the theory of relativity, you would get lost. It wouldn't work. So think about that the next time you get an Amazon delivery or a pizza delivery, right? The pizza delivery guy found your house thanks to Albert Einstein, right? What has Galileo done for you lately? Nothing. So if you Google the inventor of GPS, two names will pop up. Einstein, because of what why is the balloons going off? That's weird. Einstein, because of what we just discussed. And the second name that pops up is this woman here. If you can look, I think it's showing up on the screen, yeah? Gladys May West. Einstein and Gladys May West are the two people credited with inventing GPS. Now, you probably saw the movie a few years back called Hidden Figures, right? Hidden Figures was about these women who worked for NASA in the 1960s. They called them human computers because they would work out a lot of the math to help the NASA engineers. And so Gladys May West was one of these hidden figures. She worked for the US Navy in the 1960s, and the Navy had just sent a satellite into space, and they were having problems tracking the distance. The satellite was floating around. They couldn't actually figure out where it was, and it kept moving, and the Earth was moving. And Gladys May West was the first person to realize you could take Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, that math equation, and apply it to satellites in space. And so she's credited with taking Einstein's theory and making it applicable to GPS. And so I called up Gladys May West. She's still alive. She's in her 90s. I called her up and interviewed her for my book, The Einstein Effect. And she told me something very funny. She goes, Benyamin, I don't even use GPS. I like the old-fashioned maps that you fold up. Right? So even she's not using GPS. So another thing, I should point out, Einstein did most of his scientific work in the year 1905. It was such a big year for Einstein. He did so much. He was so prolific in that year, and he changed the way we look at the whole universe during that one year, that historians simply call it Einstein's miracle year, 1905. And there are books written just about Einstein's miracle year. I have a chapter in my book about Einstein's miracle year. And the funny thing was, Einstein was 26 years old. He peaked really early. That's when he did the most work of his entire career, was 1905, and he was 26. And the irony is, he had just graduated from college, got a physics degree, and his dream was to become a physics professor. And no school would hire him. He was a bad student. He didn't have good grades. He couldn't find a job. Can you believe that? Einstein could not find a job being a professor. He got so desperate that he put a classified ad in the newspaper offering to tutor high school kids with their algebra homework. Can you imagine if your kid had Einstein as a math tutor? Right? So that's what he was doing to make money. Eventually, finally, thanks to a family friend, Einstein got his first job when he was 26 years old. And it was working at a patent office in Bern, Switzerland. And basically, he sat all day reviewing patent applications. That's what he did during the day. And at night, after a full day's work, when his wife and his little baby went to bed, he by candlelight would write. He wrote 4 papers during 1905 that revolutionized science. 4 revolutionary papers during that year. One of the papers, I'm not going to go through all of them. But one of the papers was about something called the photoelectric effect. And so the photoelectric effect is basically turning light particles into energy. The easiest way to picture this is a remote control. So if you're holding a remote control, remember in the old days, remote control, you'd see like a little red light, like a laser come out of it, and it would change the channel. It would change the channel, or it would change, hit pause on the remote control. So that works. That's the photoelectric effect. It's taking a light and the light is doing something. So when you're watching Netflix tonight and you're hitting pause or turning the volume, you have Einstein to thank for that. You see the photoelectric effect in your daily life all the time. When you go to the grocery store and the self-checkout, there's that red laser, and you take the barcode and you scan it. There you go. And you scan it over the red laser. That's the photoelectric effect doing that. When you walk into a grocery store and you step on the mat and the glass doors open up, right? That's the photoelectric effect. All of the photoelectric effect is in space technology. It's in iPhones. It's in cameras. So much of our technology uses the photoelectric effect. And, Einstein is so famous for the theory of relativity, for E equals mc squared, but that's not what he won the Nobel Prize for. He won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect. So I said tonight I wanted to talk about 2 parts of Albert Einstein, Einstein's head and Einstein's heart. And so we've talked about Einstein's head. Literally, we talked about the man who stole Einstein's brain. We also talked about some of the ideas that came out of Einstein's head, photoelectric effect, different things like that. Now we're going to pivot and talk about Einstein's heart. Now, don't worry, nobody actually stole Einstein's heart. When I say we're going to talk about Einstein's heart, I mean his humanitarian side. Einstein was a big humanitarian. He had a big heart, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So we all know, Einstein was a German Jewish scientist. And in the early 1930s, as the Nazis rose to power, Einstein was the most famous Jew in all of Germany. And the Nazis actually put a bounty on Einstein's head, a $5,000 bounty, which was probably a lot of money back then. And there were actually 2 assassination attempts against Albert Einstein in Berlin. And so he saw the writing on the wall and he goes, I got to get out of here. And so him and his wife, Elsa, immigrated to the United States in October 1933. And they came to America on something called an EB-1 visa. An EB-1 visa is for someone of high academic achievement, right? The American universities were trying to bring the best and the brightest to their college campuses. And so they created this EB-1 visa to make it easier for professors from other countries to move here. When Einstein moved here, they changed the name. It's no longer called the EB-1 visa. They renamed it. It's now called the Einstein visa. And people to this day are still using the Einstein visa to move to America. They've lowered the standards. You don't have to be someone of high academic achievement, just someone of high achievement. So, for example, there is a lot of professional athletes from Europe who want to play sports, professional sports in America, and they immigrate to America on an Einstein visa, right? So today, in 2024, people are still moving to America on an Einstein visa. And so when Einstein got here, he wanted to try as hard as he could to rescue his fellow German Jews from the Holocaust. And so he got visas wherever he could. He couldn't get a lot, but he got some visas for German Jews to move to America. And there are Jews that he got to Alaska that immigrated to, he got them a visa to Alaska. He got someone a visa to Mexico. And all of these people were rescued thanks to Albert Einstein. The biggest thing that Einstein did when he got to America was he launched an organization called the International Rescue Committee. The International Rescue Committee, he launched it again to help German Jews escape the Holocaust, but it's still around today. The International Rescue Committee, 90 years later, is one of the world's biggest refugee aid organizations around today. So, for example, we all remember in the news in February 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, right? We all read in the newspaper about hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who fled the country and were escaping Ukraine to Moldova and Poland and other countries. One of the groups that was helping the refugees was Einstein's group. So he's still, again, saving people today. He's still saving people. I interviewed for my book a Ukrainian woman who escaped Ukraine 2 years ago because of Einstein's group. And she said, I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for Albert Einstein. So you see, he's still impacting people's lives. She called Einstein an instrument of God. And so as I said, the International Rescue Committee is a large organization, and they have a celebrity spokesperson, right? And their celebrity spokesperson is actor Mandy Patinkin. So we all know Mandy Patinkin. If you know his acting, you know him from Princess Bride, Homeland, Chicago Hope. He's also a great singer. He tours the country for putting on concerts, if you ever get to see him in concert. And he's a big activist. And his cause is helping refugees. And he's not some actor that just films a commercial and goes back home. Mandy Patinkin walks the walk. He has traveled with Einstein's group all over the globe, to Syria, to Africa, helping refugees. So it's a very important cause for him. So I'm writing the book, and I have a chapter in my book about the International Rescue Committee and Einstein's group. And I asked them, I said, could you put me in touch with Mandy? I would love to interview him for my book. And they did. And it was during COVID. And so I interviewed Mandy over Zoom. And we were supposed to talk for a half hour. We ended up talking for 2 hours. He was very generous with his time. And, he told me how much Einstein inspired him to become an activist, a humanitarian. And so, okay, we hung up, and I thought, great. It was very nice chatting with Mandy. I'm sure I'll never hear from him again. I'm going to tell you a funny behind-the-scenes story. After the book came out, about 2 weeks later, I get a call on my phone, and the caller ID on my phone says Mandy Patinkin. And so I pick it up. I'm like, hello? And he's like, Benyamin, this is Mandy Patinkin. I really loved your book. Thank you so much for putting in a chapter about Einstein's organization, Saving Refugees. Hopefully it'll draw attention to the group, and more people will learn about how Einstein was a humanitarian. Listen, I love the book so much. I want to help you promote the book. I'll do whatever I can to promote the book. And so Mandy agreed to do an event with me in person in October, just a few months ago, about 6 months ago, in New York at the Stryker Center in New York. Mandy and I were on stage talking for an hour about Einstein's humanitarian work with refugees. And I think I have a picture here. Yeah, here's me and Mandy on stage. I don't know if you can see, Mandy is holding up some eggs. I gave him a half a dozen eggs for my chickens. But, we were on stage, in this big theater in Manhattan. I felt like I was a kid who had won like a Make-A-Wish Foundation prize. Like, what was I doing on stage with this celebrated actor? And it was a real fun night. My family was in the audience. I should say, a little brief aside, I'm the son of a rabbi. All my brothers are rabbis. My sisters married rabbis. I'm the only one that didn't go into the family business. I would say I'm the black sheep of the family, but they're all wearing black hats. So I guess I'm the white sheep of the family. And if you're interested, that's a lot of what my first book, My Jesus Year, is about me and my connection with my faith. And how I went... I spent a year going to 52 churches over 52 Sundays, and I write about what I learned about Christianity and how it made me appreciate my Judaism. That's a commercial for that. Anyway, so my family is in the audience at this Mandy event. 2 of my rabbinic brothers were there, and here's a picture. I introduced them to Mandy backstage. I should not have let my brothers be alone with Mandy for 2 minutes, because when I came back, one of my brothers, my rabbinic brother who runs a Jewish nonprofit, was asking Mandy for a donation. And my other brother, who is a rabbi of a congregation in Connecticut, was asking Mandy to join his synagogue. So I was like, guys, please stop embarrassing me. But helping refugees was not the only humanitarian cause that Einstein was involved with. Another important cause that he worked for tirelessly was the civil rights movement, right? Einstein had just left Germany. He fled Germany, and he saw in Germany what happens when you belittle a minority, when you don't treat everyone as equals. And he came to America, and he couldn't believe what was happening with racism in America. And he said, I want to do whatever I can to help with the civil rights movement. And he did. He traveled the country giving talks with the NAACP, raising money for the NAACP. There was a black student at Princeton who couldn't afford tuition. Albert Einstein paid for his tuition, and Albert Einstein was not a wealthy man. In 1946, Albert Einstein gave the commencement address at Lincoln University. Lincoln University was the first college to offer degrees to African American students. And Einstein got up and gave the graduation speech, and he said, I will not stand idly by and watch this happen. My favorite story about Einstein and the civil rights movement was regarding Marian Anderson. Many of you may know Marian Anderson was a famous African-American opera singer, and she was invited to perform in Princeton, and she came to a theater in Princeton. I was actually just there last night. And Einstein was a fan, and so Einstein came to the concert. And for someone who invented GPS, Einstein never got his driver's license. He was the typical absent-minded professor. He was always got lost, no sense of direction. He used to love to go sailing, and he would get lost at sea in the lake, and kids would have to tug his boat back to shore. Anyway, he walked to the theater. It was about a mile from his house. He goes to the theater, loves the concert, and he goes backstage to meet Marian Anderson, like a fan. And they end up having a great conversation. And he goes, where are you staying? And she says, I'm staying at the NASA Inn. And the NASA Inn is still there. It's like the main hotel on the main street there. And he goes, great, let's walk over to the NASA Inn. So they walk over to the NASA Inn, and they go to check, and she goes to check in, and they say, you can't stay here. It's a whites only hotel. And Einstein was flabbergasted. He's standing there in the lobby with her, and he couldn't believe what he heard. And so he said, Marian, just walk back to my house. You can stay at my place. It was about a half-mile walk. They went back to Einstein's house, and she stayed there. And they remained lifelong friends, Marian Anderson and Albert Einstein. There was actually a couple of years ago an off-Broadway play about the friendship between Marian Anderson and Albert Einstein. One more humanitarian thing about Albert Einstein was he spoke out a lot against war, right? He couldn't understand that countries would go to war with each other. Einstein referred to himself as a militant pacifist. When he was a young man, he did not serve in the German military. When he was a young man in Switzerland, he didn't serve in the Swiss army. And he spoke out. If you saw the Oppenheimer movie, he was very upset with Oppenheimer creating the atomic bomb. And so a couple weeks before Einstein died, he and his friend, a British philosopher, Bertrand Russell, wrote what's known as the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. And it's all about stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. And in it, they wrote, we are not members of this nation or that nation. We are all human beings, right? Einstein was not a politician. There's a funny story. This is a true story. Einstein was asked to be the president of Israel. Now, president of Israel is like Queen of England. It's a ceremonial position. The prime minister is the one that has the power. And so the story is 1952. Chaim Weizmann, who was the president of Israel, died. Chaim Weizmann was actually a friend of Einstein's. He was a fellow scientist before he became president. And when Chaim Weizmann died, Israel was looking for a new president, ceremonial position. And they said, why don't we go ask Albert Einstein? So they sent the Israel ambassador to the US to Einstein's home in Princeton, knocks on his door, and he goes, Dr. Einstein, I have great news. We'd like you to be the president of Israel. And so Einstein's like, let me think about it. Come back tomorrow. So the ambassador comes back the next day, knocks on the door, and Einstein says, listen, you don't want me to be the president. I don't like going to fancy black tie affairs. As I said earlier, Einstein used to walk around in his pajamas. He had holes in his sweaters. He wore, he didn't even wear socks a lot of the times. There's a great story. Einstein invited friends to his house for dinner once, and his wife said to him, "Albert, get dressed. We're having friends for dinner." And Einstein said, "Listen, if my friends want to come and see me, they'll see me. If they want to see my clothes, I'll show them where the closet is." Right? So Einstein said, "Listen, you don't want me to be the president of Israel. I'm not the right fit for that." But Einstein supported Israel, and matter of fact, he is one of the founders of Hebrew University, and he left his entire estate to Hebrew University, which is in Jerusalem. We associate Einstein with Princeton or the Institute for Advanced Study, but he left his estate to Hebrew University, and they have 85,000 documents of Einstein related to Einstein there. So a lot of it is his scientific writings. A lot of it is fan mail. Einstein, as we talked about earlier, was a very famous man, and he got a lot of fan mail. And people would write, everyday people would write him. Kids would write him letters. I saw a letter when I was there. It was from a plumber in New York City, wrote a letter and said, "Dr. Einstein, if physics doesn't work out, we'd love for you to join our plumbing company in Manhattan." And the funny thing is, Einstein, because he was so approachable, he just wrote these people back, and he became pen pals with these people. And so the Einstein Archives has all of these letters that were sent to Einstein, because that's he gave them after he died. The estate gave them there. But you would think we don't have all those outgoing letters that he wrote to all of these average Americans, everyday people. But interestingly enough, Einstein's secretary, when she would type the outgoing letters, she typed them on carbon copy paper. So they have a copy of not only all the incoming mail, but all of the outgoing mail as well. So you see this beautiful friendship that Einstein developed with so many people around the world. And so when you think about it, so in the year 1999, December 1999, Time magazine is trying to pick a person of the century. At the end of the 20th century, they were trying to pick a person of the century. They could have chosen a lot of people. They could have chosen JFK, MLK, Gandhi, the Beatles, Princess Diana, right? But they chose Albert Einstein as the person of the century. There's a picture of it. And yes, he was, I think, they chose him, of course. He was a great scientist, of course. But I think they also chose him because as we've talked about tonight, he was a great humanitarian as well. I'll conclude tonight, and I'll open it up to questions. In case you're wondering what happened to Albert Einstein's brain, we started tonight talking the story about the brain, the guy who stole the brain. And I want to tell you what the end of that story, what happened to the brain. So this guy had it for decades. 60s, 70s, 1980s, 1990s, and he would be sending little pieces of the brain to different people. He still had about 75% of the brain. It was cut up. It was in multiple jars. I actually have a picture I'm going to show you, which is going to blow your mind. This is the guy in 1997. This is a picture from 1997. The doctor is in his 80s now. This is the doctor that performed Einstein's autopsy. And you see he's holding 3 jars. There's a small little jar and then 2 big jars. That's Albert Einstein's brain in there, cut up. And he still had it. And he's getting old, as you can see in this picture. And in 1997, he decides he is going to return the brain to Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn Einstein, who lives in Berkeley, California. And this doctor lives in Princeton, New Jersey. And so he decides to go pay a visit to Evelyn Einstein. And what I can only imagine is the world's most bizarre cross-country road trip. This guy rents a Buick Skylark, puts Einstein's brain in a Tupperware container in the trunk, and he drives cross-country from New Jersey all the way to California. And he shows up at the restaurant for lunch. He meets Evelyn Einstein for lunch. He goes inside the restaurant. He leaves the brain in the trunk. And he starts to have lunch with Evelyn Einstein. Everything seems to be going pretty good. About halfway through the meal, Evelyn gets up to use the restroom. And this guy changes his mind. And he goes, "I don't want to give the brain back." And so while Evelyn is in the restroom, he runs out of the restaurant, doesn't pay the bill, hops back in his car, drives all the way back to New Jersey with Einstein's brain. So he did not return the brain to Evelyn Einstein in 1997. Fast forward to 2007. 2007. So we're talking recent history. That's not too long ago, 2007. So 2007, this guy is in his 90s now. And he's really worried that, like, you know, he's not going to be around forever. He really needs to figure out what to do with Einstein's brain. So he takes these 3 jars, puts them in a cardboard box, and brings them to a friend of his in Princeton, who is a doctor who's a little younger than him, 60s. Now the doctor's in his 70s. And he brings the box to this younger doctor and puts it on the floor of this doctor's office and says, "It's your problem now." And he leaves. And so now this 60, 70-year-old doctor in Princeton is the current caretaker today, is the current caretaker of Albert Einstein's brain. And he wants to remain anonymous. He doesn't want people to know who he is, that he has Albert Einstein's brain. He's afraid people may come and break into his house. And so we'll call him Dr. X. And so I'm writing a book about Albert Einstein. The story of the brain was the story that first got me interested in Albert Einstein. And I have a chapter in my book about the brain. And I thought to myself, how cool would it be if I could find the brain? It's been missing for so many years. What if I could find it? And I'm a reporter. I'm a journalist. I should be able to use some of my investigative reporting skills to try to track this guy down. And I was able to. I'm happy to report. I found the guy. I found Dr. X. And I called him and I emailed him. And he wrote me back and he said, "No, thank you. I don't want any publicity. I don't want people to know who I am. No, thank you." He said he wouldn't talk to me. And it took me 2 years to write this book. And every few months, as I'm writing the book, I would call him or email him and say, "Have you changed your mind? I'd love to come and see the brain." Finally, a week before I had to turn the book into the publisher, he calls me up and he goes, "Fine, I'll show you the brain. Meet me in Princeton tomorrow." And so I don't live anywhere near. I live in West Virginia. It's about a 7-hour drive. I hop in my car. I drive to Princeton, New Jersey. I check into the Nassau Inn, the same hotel that wouldn't let Marian Anderson stay there. And I meet Dr. X in a parking lot. He pops open his trunk, and in the trunk is the cardboard box with these 3 jars in it with Einstein's brain. And he let me hold these jars. And I'm holding this jar, and I'm afraid I'm going to, drop it or something. And I couldn't believe, I'm holding the last physical vestige of Albert Einstein in my hand. There's like 0 degrees of separation between me and Albert Einstein. And I thought to myself, I'm so close to Albert Einstein, right? What if I could have 5 minutes with Albert Einstein in heaven? Like, what if I had a 5-minute conversation with Einstein? What would I want to talk to him about? And with this, I'll conclude. I would want to talk to Albert Einstein about my favorite Einstein quotation, right? We talked tonight how Einstein is famous for his quotations. This is my favorite Einstein quotation. It's 2 sentences. "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. Let's look at that first sentence. I have no special talent, right? Albert Einstein, of all people, has every right to say, I have special talent, right? Smartest man in the world. But yet he was so humble. He said, right? What did his mom say in Yiddish? "I'm gornisht, I'm zilch, I'm nothing. I have no special talent." Imagine how much better the world would be today if the politicians who think they're so high and mighty, or the tech entrepreneurs, if they had just an ounce of some of Einstein's humility. And then look at the second sentence. "I am only passionately curious." We've talked a lot tonight about Einstein's humanitarian work, right? And what does it mean to be a humanitarian? It means to care about people other than yourself. And that's what it means to be curious. So when you walk up to somebody, when you meet somebody, you can approach them and be very self-centered and be like, "Let me tell you about me. Here's what I did today. Here's my accomplishments. Me, 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 me." Or you could be very curious, or as Einstein eloquently said, passionately curious. You could walk up to somebody and say, "Tell me about you. Tell me your story. Tell me about your struggles." That's what Einstein was after. And so, with this, I'll close. I've studied Einstein for so many years, and if the 2 biggest lessons I've taken away from Einstein are, number 1, to have bold humility, and number 2, to always be passionately curious. So I know we have a few minutes. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions people might have.
Thanks, Benyamin. That was really fun and really interesting. And I think I can speak for everyone when I say I learned an amazing amount of new things. So thank you. Does
Thank you
anybody
so
have
much.
any questions? I have one. Somebody
Okay.
wrote a book about driving around with Einstein's brain. What's it called?
Yeah,
Driving
so they're
Einstein? Is that what
close.
it's
So
called?
there are two books about the brain. The one you're talking about. So I said the guy took a cross-country road trip from New Jersey to California to meet Evelyn Einstein. He was in his 80s at the time. He could not make that cross-country road trip by himself. And so a journalist drove him cross-country. A
Ah,
journalist was driving the car. And that journalist wrote a book about the trip. And that book is called Driving Mr. Albert.
yes, yes, yes.
Great book.
We
And
have
then
that at the library if anybody wants it.
there's another great book about the brain called Possessing Genius. Possessing Genius is all about the guy who performed the autopsy and what he did with the brain during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and also the scientists who got pieces and what they learned about the brain. So it's all about that side of the story. Both of them are really fascinating books. You should, of course, read my book, but those are other books you should read too. Yeah, Tony.
Tony, you have to unmute.
You're on mute.
Did they ever find anything, all the study of his brain that was noticeably different from any other brain?
That's a great question. So, a lot of the scientists who got pieces were like, I can't tell anything from this piece. It's just a random piece of tissue, flesh. Also think about like, what is wisdom? What is, is it the actual physical brain or is it the consciousness in that brain? There were two scientists in particular who did find something unique about Albert Einstein's brain. In addition to sending pieces of the brain, this guy actually did do one thing smart, the guy who stole the brain. Before he cut it up, he took 300 photographs, all like 3D, 360, of the brain. So we have all these high-res photographs from every angle of the brain. And so people saw pieces and they had those photographs. And so two things that they found were, number one, we have a right side of the brain and a left side of the brain. And we have wires that connect the right side and the left side of the brain. And what they discovered was Einstein had many, many, many more wires connecting the right side and the left side of the brain. They called it an information superhighway. So he had more neural connectors. The other thing they found was Einstein died when he was 76 years old, but his brain, they said, looked like the brain of a 26-year-old. So it hadn't aged. And if you recall from my talk, Einstein was 26 during his miracle year when he came up with all those amazing ideas. And so his brain hadn't aged, which was obviously pretty fascinating.
Well, then one more question. Did they have a sense that he was born this way as kind of an anomaly? Or is this something that just one can create in their lifetime?
Yeah. As a chicken farmer, that's the classic chicken and the egg conundrum. I don't know. I will say this. Einstein there are stories that people think Einstein had autism or was dyslexic. He was there's no proof of that, but he did have a slow start. He didn't speak. He spoke very late, like his first words. I think he was like 3 or 4 by the time he spoke. But once he started speaking, and once he was a very smart kid. There are stories in high school. He would teach himself algebra and geometry, and he was reading philosophy books during the summer. So he was a bright guy. He didn't like structure, so a lot of teachers didn't like him. He didn't take notes. He wasn't good on tests, but I think he was a very smart kid. So I think maybe he was born with this special talent, Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for such a
Oh,
fun evening. And thanks everybody for being here. We really appreciate it.
thank you for hosting me. This was a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.